Hello, symbol lovers. This is The Seven Deadly Sins and Four Last Things by Hieronymus Bosch. And before I mentioned that we could identify the definition of the symbolic oranges in the Seven Deadly Sins by studying the work of Jan van Eyck. So this is his portrait of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife. And you'll notice there's a few oranges right on his windowsill. And we can use the general rules of Bosch symbolism to read Jan van Eyck. The first rule of reading symbols is there is no such thing as magic. Do you see anything magical happening here? Yes, you do. You see the woman casting a shadow across the bed. But we can tell there is no other light source in the room other than that window if we look into the mirror. It's a little tiny room, one light source, and yet she casts a shadow across the bed. He, on the other hand, casts a shadow across the dog. This is a portrait also by Van Eyck, and we can see by the man's distinctive features that he is the same man in the wedding picture. And this kind of indicates that Van Eyck had a long acquaintance with this man. And in the wedding picture, as it's called, in between the husband and wife here, we see that signature on the wall. The writing's on the wall and it says, Jan van Eyck was here. And just for fun, we should point out that the writing on the wall, and we see between these two, writing on the wall, the writing on the wall in the Bible was a harbinger of doom. It meant the end of the Babylonian Empire. And so these two lovebirds are separated by the writing on the wall. And so the portrait and the signature on the wall all indicate that Van Eyck knew these people intimately. I rush to tell you right up front that this is not a wedding picture, but that the woman in the picture has died, and we can tell that by reading the symbols. We'll start with those clodhoppers in the bottom left-hand corner. And here what they mean is he has stepped in from the dirty outside world and he now stands on sacred ground. In the Seven Deadly Sins, Hieronymus Bosch uses the same thing but differently. Notice in the Seven Deadly Sins that the clodhoppers are between the two men. That's because they probably belong to the woman. The woman has taken off her shoes because she has been forced to get dirty, get in the mud between the two men to save a life. So she's kicked off her shoes because she's stepping down, but in the so-called wedding portrait, we have him taking off his dirty shoes because he's now on sacred ground. So the removal of the shoes means two opposite things. But it's a transition from one world to another. Next, we'll do the dog. Dogs pretty much always mean fidelity. In this case, notice that the dog is going from the man, he's the tail, but the woman is the head. And so it's his fidelity to her. And behind them is a bed, and above their heads, in between them, there's that fancy chandelier. In the chandelier, there is one candle. One candle is more or less above his head, and it is lit. And above her head, you can't even see it. There's a candle that's burnt out. And in the other candle places, they are empty. So there's one light, one that's burnt out, and four empty places above their heads. The mirror between them contains a portrait of two men, two people who are standing outside of this room. They are outside of this world, but they did witness this world. And the writing on the wall says Van Eyck was here. Van Eyck witnessed this. He can vouch for the truth of what we're seeing in front of us. And so, what are we seeing in front of us? A good place to begin is understanding all that cloth. The fashion at the time was for married women to either be pregnant or look pregnant or be prepared to be pregnant, because the Bible said, go forth and multiply. And so it becomes every person's duty to pass on the life they've been given in childbirth. And so these are all good Christian women, and they're all prepared to do their duty. So they already they're more or less walking around in maternity clothes. And if you were wealthy and pregnant, you might spend the last 3 months of your pregnancy in bed with a handy birthing chair right nearby. Women at this time gave birth in chairs, sitting down. And if you were wealthy, like the Arnolfinis, you had a nice, sturdy, custom, high-back, short-seated chair that while you were being pampered for that last 3 months of pregnancy, it would be ever at the ready for you to give birth. It was strong enough to brace you or someone else helping you to give birth. There was no good medicine at the time, so the best of the wealthy could do was a decent birthing chair. So here we see that birthing chair. It's up against the wall, but we know it's a birthing chair by that carving at the top. That is Saint Margaret or Saint Marguerite. And she is overcoming a dragon. So she is the patron saint of birth. She has conquered Satan she was swallowed by a dragon, and her crucifix turned into a sword. She hacked her way out and thereby became the patron saint of childbirth. And so it is appropriate that her image is on that birthing chair, but it is also ominous that it is placed at an equal plane with the woman's head. The woman's head is closely associated with Saint Margaret and the dragon. So the reason there were so many variations on Saint Margaret and the dragon was because the women needed reassurance at this time that they were going to be all right, that the childbirth was going to come out okay, because the mortality rate for mother and child was so huge at this time. Cesarean deliveries were not unheard of, but they were also not terribly successful. So the life and death aspects of birth, it helps explain why there's so many blood-red beds. It's because creating a family was a life and death proposition and always involved the spilling of some blood. To understand the chandelier of the Arnolfinis, we need to understand the dragon that was over their head. This woman seems to be happily going about her day, but what's that over her head? It seems harmless, but really it's the tail of the dragon. If we turn the page, we see the rest of the dragon. This woman is at a different stage in life, and she is pregnant. She's walking under the shadow of the dragon, and she's following the path of that little dragon. That is, she has dangers from overhead as well as dangers from within her. Her own baby can kill her. So any sensible expecting couple would call on the help of Saint Margaret of Cortona, Saint Margaret of Antioch, and Saint Catherine of the spiked wheel fame. So spikes, torn flesh, and life and death all are bound up in the images of childbirth, and including the little dog. The little dog is not only the symbol for the midwife, but in one legend, the dragon is turned into a little dog. So symbolically, we can say that the dog counterbalances the chandelier. The chandelier is pregnancy and delivery, and the dog is the protection against that, the balance. The dog is the midwife. According to the symbols, Mr. Arnolfini did all he could. He put a rug under his wife's feet as much as he was able. He provided a midwife. That's what the little dog means. He provided that state-of-the-art birthing chair. But it was still not enough to protect her from that spiky chandelier, the spikiness over her head and over the heads of both of them. She was under the threat of the dragon of childbirth. And it was the childbirth, according to the symbols, that killed her. The cameos around the mirror between them depict the living Jesus on his side of the mirror, but episodes of the dead Jesus on her side of the mirror. And also, I should point out that that is precisely how heretics would divide the life of Jesus. They respect the living side of Jesus, but they reject the resurrection, the second coming, the visit with Paul, all that stuff is rejected. So the mirror is actually a very interesting heretical icon there. Anyway, so just to go over our symbols of doom and gloom, the one light remaining in the chandelier is over his head. Over her head is a snuffed out candle. He is dressed in mourning clothes. She is bathed in an unearthly light that is not coming from this room. Her head is parallel with the symbol of Saint Margaret and the dragon. There is an empty love seat behind them. There is that empty birthing chair behind them. There is that blood red bed over which she has cast a shadow. There is that burnt out candle. There is the divided cameos on the mirror between life and death. There is those hung up prayer beads. She comes to him empty-handed. There's that icon, I believe it's a temple guardian image above their hands, and it really refers to courage. And finally, there are those oranges on the wall. She and the two lost babies are the three oranges that have tumbled off of the windowsill. So the oranges represent, well, fruit, essentially. And they carry seeds. They carry on the tradition of the family. So that's one definition of fruit. And that's how it's being used here, that he is the one fruit that remains. The mirror is a reflection, and it's also a distortion. It's saying this isn't exactly what's happening. This is a distortion, but this is a reflection or a contemplation on their situation. So Van Eyck has painted the couple as his friend wished the couple to be remembered. He is the dutiful husband who provided everything he could for his wife, and she was the noble wife who was ready, willing, and able to do her wifely duty. He is paying his last respects. She is with God. Anyway, you'll be able to see gloom and doom everywhere once you begin understanding the symbols of Hieronymus Bosch.